Well, 6 after 9. I probably shouldn't encourage massive amounts of tardiness here, so we'll get started. I went to a meeting this week. They started 5 minutes before the hour they were supposed to start. I mean, everybody was there. I walk in, I'm like 2 minutes late, and 15 people are sitting at this meeting. That's excessive. I've never been to a meeting before. So, we are going to do one more session on the Praktimoksa, talking about the rules that monastics follow. Even though we don't follow rules, these particular rules, what we're looking at here as we go through this that's instructive for us is the spirit of what they're trying to do here. So you kind of have to put yourself into this kind of imaginative space of what it is like to be an early disciple of the Buddha. And this idea of renunciation is totally complete in a physical sense, in a material sense, that they're breaking the ties with their family, which at that time would be very strong. They're foregoing the idea that they're going to be married, raise a family. In the early Buddhists, some of the times people left their families, but presumably that was generally not encouraged unless you were rich enough that you could provide for people. You weren't supposed to abandon your family just because you wanted the easy life of the monastery. It's only when you think about the worldly life and, you got a bunch of kids, you're working, you're married, financial obligations, that all of a sudden this idea of the Buddhist simplicity would start sounding really good. And in fact, everybody would want to become a monk or nun, let alone the women too, for that matter, to leave their husbands with the kids and get off, become a nun. So, in a way, it has its appeal because you don't really have a third alternative. They don't really have a society like we have, a middle-class society with ample leisure to pursue things. Basically, life is short and you work really hard to get, a family and a career and, and they don't have a safety net, so you've got to, keep out there getting the money all the time, getting fed all the time, keeping other people fed. And, or you just, renounced it all and said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to, lead the spiritual life. But ultimately, the way in which you're working with, it's all about working with your mind. And so even though they're doing this physical thing of renouncing material goods, I mean, if you don't renounce anything in your mind, if you just renounce it physically, but you're still thinking about it all the time or desiring it, then you're hooked by material things. I mean, some of us who are raised in ample circumstances really never give a lot of thought to material possessions because they're sort of always been around. Other people who maybe gone through periods where they didn't have anything and it stressed them out a lot, it's very hard for them to this idea that, they to renounce material goods. So a lot of times it's pretty much personal and circumstantial as to how attached you're going to be to material. But everyone benefits from not being mentally attached, to be more resilient and patient with the ups and downs of our worldly life. And the best way to simplify things is, we can simplify our lives even in the world, but, by emptying our minds of prejudices and preoccupations and obsessions that we have with all the, extraneous stuff that we have floating about, by kind of, settling down and letting all that come to rest. then we get to the kind of simplicity that the early Buddhists are trying to develop. And they're doing it through a way of, it's interesting enough, the rules. So they have a whole bunch of rules, but there's only one rule, and the rule is against selfishness or self-seeking. I mean, so there's like 50 rules about robes, and don't make a black robe. Don't have this person make your robe. Don't be hitting up people for robes. Don't, replace a robe before it's time to be replaced. And then on and on and on. And the whole thing is really, you look at every one of those 50 rules, and it's all something where even in a minuscule, minimalistic situation like a monastery or this kind of proto-monastery they're developing, they're all still trying to one-up each other by having a slightly better robe, or making themselves more comfortable. Very human kind of thing. Get a little more food, make life easier for themselves. And so they're really, all the rules are just sort of to kind of get you out of any kind of self-seeking, trying to get a little something extra for yourself. So that's the ultimate simplicity, is to lessen self-preoccupation and self-seeking. So where we left it last time, we got to, there were the 4 rules that immediately got you expelled, which was killing, stealing, having sex since you'd taken a vow of celibacy, and also claiming supernatural or superhuman powers. So those 4 pretty much, if you violated that, it was called a defeat, and you were expelled for good. And essentially, it's not that you're an evil person per se. Short of killing people, which would be evil, but it's just that you're not at all suitable for the monastic life. So if you're so bad, seducing the daughters of patrons and stuff, then this is not the life for you, and you're not going to be a good representative of the monastic life, and they just need to get you out right away and make that separation. Now, I sent you some stuff which Joe distributed. There's a bunch of background material on these rules, which is interesting to read. One of the writers that Joe and I both came across had divided all the rules up topically, and shows how they basically are right speech, right livelihood. They sort of follow the Eightfold Path, basic moral conduct. Although it did provide a little bit of more information than I had given earlier as to how they enforce these rules. So like I said, if a monk breaks one of the 4 most serious ones, those are called parajika, then he's expelled from the community for life. And then, this wasn't clear to me, if he breaks one of the next most serious class of rules, the Sangha Deceasus, he is put on probation for 6 days, during which time he is stripped of his seniority, is not trusted to go anywhere unaccompanied by 4 other monks of regular standing, and daily has to confess his offense to every monk who lives in or happens to visit the monastery. At the end of his probation, 20 monks have to be convened to reinstate him to his original status. So that's their disciplinary, that would be so embarrassing. Can you imagine? It'd just be the worst. Right then and there, you might as well just give it up. So you'd have to be, if you went through that, almost like hazing, daily confession, kind of, like a re-education camp here. You'd be committed to sticking with the rules and being a monk, or at this point, you'd have to decide whether or not this was your vocation. So it's very interesting. So that's what they would do for that next level. And remember, some of those ones they kind of vary, but I mean, at one point they throw out monks who are corrupters of families and practitioners of evil, which is rather vague, but basically, in some unspecified way, that would be one of those types. Like a robe when you weren't supposed to get a robe and stuff. And then there's just a ton of them that are basically problematic, but in smaller ways than just being evil. And those you just confess to another monk. So you have to acknowledge it publicly, but you don't have to get the whole group together to make a confession or go on probation. And then some of them are just in the very last category, are just meant to be, good advice on how you should behave yourself. So where we stopped, we'd gone through all the ones that require a public confession. And now we got to, there's ones called, there's two special ones they have here, which are interesting. They're called anayata dharmas. And basically, there's situations where a woman accuses a monk of sexual misconduct. And interestingly enough, and somewhat relevant in contemporary life, whenever the woman is a lay practitioner, a nun, or someone who's of good reputation, known, then as soon as she makes the accusation, that monk goes on trial. They don't dismiss it. They don't. I mean, so then they start making inquiry of the monk, and then she says, "Well, that's what happened." And they said, "Did this happen?" And if it does, then he has to go through the appropriate punishment. So if it was, which could be anywhere from, just hanging out with a woman, which is a small offense because the monks aren't supposed to be doing that, or it could be seducing someone, in which case you get tossed. So this is an interesting one. I mean, both of these, it's very specific that they need to make a full inquiry when that kind of situation arises. So you can see they're trying very hard to keep on the up and up about this. Now we get to 39 ones where you just do a simple confession to another monk if you violate these, but you have to give something up. And presumably by the time you get to the monthly recitation, you could confess it there, but usually you've confessed it beforehand. And so these 39, we'll go through a little bit of this. Now, venerable ones, the 30 dharmas come up in half-monthly session, and these are the ones where you have to return something. So number one, when a monk is provided with a set of robes and the ceremony has been suspended, an extra optional robe may be worn up to 10 days. Should the monk wear it beyond that, that's a fault. If the monk's been provided with a set of robes and the ceremony is over, and then outside that he requires extra robes, that's a fault. A robe, the monk gets the robe at the wrong time when the ceremony is not happening. Basically, if you start stockpiling robes, that's a fault. Which is an odd thing. I mean, you're here studying the Dharma, you're meditating. Why are you stockpiling robes? It would be sort of an odd one, but apparently it did happen, and such was the rule. You can't have a robe that's been washed, dyed, or beaten by an unrelated nun. You can't have one given to you by an unrelated nun. So you can't, as a monk, you can't have the nuns be making your robes and doing housework for you. That's a fault, and that has to be confessed. So no exploitation of the nuns, and no contact with them, really, in that kind of way. You also can't go to householders and suggest they give you robes. That's going to be a fault. and so forth. So they have quite a few of these are basically ways in which you get robes in the, I'm not going to read the whole set of 39. So robes are, you get too many robes, you get them at the wrong time, you don't follow the proper process, that's a fault in the Sangha. So that's pretty well regulated. The other thing is that they have meditation rugs. They meditate on, rugs, and they just put a rug under a tree or in their meditation hall. And so they have to have rules like, no, you can't make your rug out of silk. You can't make your rug out of pure black sheep's wool. Apparently that was too cutting edge. And restrictions on your rug, your meditation rug, so you don't try and make that fancier than it should. So there's a bunch of rules on that. And the wool for your rug can't come from unrelated nuns, and so forth. Then they have the rule like number 18, the monk cannot acquire gold or silver or cause it to be acquired, that's a fault. So the early monks can't handle money at all. All they do is they've got their begging bowl, they get their food, they go meditate, they go hear talks, or they might be talking with lay people or questioners. But they're not engaged in any kind of commerce at all. And people can't, if they give them money, they have to refuse that. Now that would change later on. The early monks are definitely more strict about this. By the time you get to medieval ages and later on, the monks are out there hustling the dollar, and oftentimes. But early days, that was not going to cut it. And even now, in monasteries, most monks will not handle money. There'll be just several monks will be designated to do that, and they do try to keep some, discipline about that. So then there are a bunch more rules about robes. Again, when you can wear them. If you have medicines that you've been taking, like butter, oil, honey, and molasses, you can't stockpile those things. You can only take them when you're sick, and so forth. So all of those type of things, you're acquiring robes, you're acquiring rugs, you're acquiring gold and silver, you're acquiring medicine. Basically, you have to confess your fault and give it up, because you're not supposed to own anything, you're not supposed to acquire anything. You have to get out of that whole mindset of acquisitiveness if you're going to lead the monastic life, the simple life here. So now we get to 90 rules that come up in the recitation that they go through. So twice a month now they're reminding themselves of all this stuff, so it's getting pretty ingrained. And these are more general moral types of guidelines, and they would apply quite a bit to lay people too. I mean, most of these rules, a lot of these rules, we would be well advised to heed. So number 1, in speaking a conscious lie, there's a fault. Number 2, in speaking of the defects of others, that's a fault. Slandering others, that's a fault. Opening up an issue that's on a question that's been decided by the Sangha and kind of re-agitating for a particular thing that's already been decided by the group, that's a fault. When a monk should teach a dharma to a woman in excess of 5 or 6 words, except in the presence of a wise man, that's a fault. So monks can't be going around teaching women and taking advantage of their position in that way, unless they are a trained teacher, which most monks wouldn't be until they were much older. Number 6, when a monk should speak the Dharma step by step to unordained man, that's a fault. So you don't, you're limited to what you can talk to people about who are not other practitioners. You can't really reveal all the details of the practice. You have to proportion it to the person's interest and to their ability to understand and so forth. So there's a whole way in which teaching takes place, and doing that in the wrong way would be a fault. Number 8. Number 7. When a monk speaks of offenses of other monks to an unordained person, that's a fault. So you don't gossip about your other monks and their wickedness to lay people. Number 8. When a monk should speak of the superhuman faculties of himself to a person who's not a monk, that's a fault. So even if you do have special faculties, you can, have lucid dreams, or you can read people's minds, or you see deities. You can't talk about that to anyone who's not a practitioner, another monk. That would be a fault to go around and try and impress people that way. Number 9. Hitting up Sangha for money, and telling them that it'd be great if they gave more money, that's a fault. Most religious organizations do not follow that, but that was a rule in the early Buddhists. Number 10, if you say that some of the rules are kind of minor and don't need to be followed, and we could just skip them, that's a fault. Number 11, destroying any seeds or vegetables is a fault. So you can't be killing plants either. Remember, they're not doing any kind of agriculture or taking care of animals or anything. They're going around begging, so there's no reason for them to be disturbing anything, really. But that's a neat one. I mean, it's very environmentally gentle. If you cause annoyance, that's a fault. If you're abusive, that's a fault. If you make your seating place where you're resting or sitting too comfortable by loading it up with couches and cushions and extra soft items, that's a fault. If you stay a night at a meditation hall and you've got a sleeping thing and then you take off the next day and you just leave it there, that's a fault. Again, anytime where you're causing trouble to other monks, particularly if you're lying about their behavior, that's a fairly serious fault. Stealing somebody else's bed space, put your sleeping bag down, that's a fault. High bed, you can't be sleeping up off the ground higher than everybody else, but like a rich person would do, that would be a fault for a monk. You have to be careful about small living creatures with water. You have to build your huts in the right way, and so forth. Criticizing the nuns is a fault, unless you're authorized to do so by one of the leaders. So you can't be hassling the nuns, can't be exploiting them, can't be seducing them. You really have to leave them alone. Can't give robes to them either. I can't give anything to them. Can't travel with them. Can't be sitting down with them in secret places or concealed places. Can't be giving them extra food, presents, and so forth. And then they have one here about illness, and it says here, one meal of alms food may be eaten by a monk who is not ill dwelling in a village. Should he eat in excess of that? All right, so if you're a normal, healthy monk, you get one bowl of food. You can't be going back and getting more bowls of food either. So you can't. There's no slack in that. And sometimes they would take food back. It's an interesting thing you realize when you're reading these rules. So the monks would go around with their begging bowl, and there'd be monks who were sick who couldn't go around. So sometimes they could get an extra bowl of food and bring it back and put it in kind of the public area where they're staying. And that could be used to feed the sick monks. So there was a provision that if the monks couldn't go themselves to get their bowl filled, another monk could do that for them, or our food could be brought to them. So there's quite a few more rules about how to eat and how to do the food stuff and so forth. And basically, you have to eat in a civilized way, quietly, not creating a scene. You can't ask for special food from families. You can't, like say, what's on the menu today? I'd like I'd like some ribs. Your ribs in the house. That would be a fault. You can't join families, at dinner usually. And just you can't be too pushy on with the begging either. That would be a fault. You can't watch armies fighting. You can't hang out with armies. Of course, you can't be in an army. You can't be a soldier. So you have to stay away from anything related to that sort of thing. And back in the day, they used to like to watch battles, and that's not something a monk can be doing. You can't get angry and strike a blow to another monk. You can't threaten another monk. You can't conceal the offense of another monk. So if you know of another monk and he's stealing or he's doing something or he's seducing people or he's involved in something that's serious, not probably one of the robe offenses or food ones, but one of the more serious harming other people type offenses, then you have to report that, which is interesting. You can't stay with people who aren't monks for over a day or two. You have to either be by yourself or be with the other monks. You can't be bad-mouthing the Dharma. You can't hang out with known evil people. And if you find money or jewels on the road while you're traveling around, you have to leave them there. You can't pick up. You can take things that are lying on the ground free. If you intentionally deprive an animal or a life, that's a fault. If you intentionally cause remorse for a monk, that's a fault. If you tickle other monks, that's a fault. If you play in the water, set up a water polo game or go swimming. That's a fault. So they're fairly serious. There's no frivolity here. Again, you can't be in the house alone with a woman overnight. You can't be scaring the other monks. You can't be pulling pranks on the other monks. You can't hide their begging bowl or their robes or anything like that. Can you imagine? All this no doubt happened once, and put a rule in place. And you can't hang out with thieves. You can't ordain a person under 20 years of age. See, monks can ordain other monks if you have two or three of you. You can, I think it's three. You can ordain a monk if they go through that process we talked about. But they have to be 20, and they have to be appropriate. It has to be an appropriate thing to do. You can't do any agriculture. You can't dig in the soil. You can't have it dug. You can't stay in any place more than 4 months. That would change later on. No gossiping, no quarreling, bickering, backfighting. That would be a fault. If you're in the middle of a philosophical discussion, you can't just take off without asking for permission to leave from a senior monk. So you can't just sort of get bored and wander off when they're in a deep Dharma discussion. You can't be drinking intoxicating beverages, spirits, or liquors. You can't be any conduct that's disgraceful. You can't be going to villages, at the wrong time of days, like, in the evening to, hang out with people. You only go in the morning to beg your food. You don't necessarily, so you have this thing where you go in the morning, you don't like try and figure out when they're having their feast or meal times and then sort of show up right then when you think they're having their best meal of the day. That would be a fault. Again, you can't have people making special stuff for you. You can't have people doing special stuff for you. And so those would all be various kinds of fault. And then they have a list of, they call it many. These are very minor ones. These are more like, some people call these etiquette. And there are 108 of these. We'll read just some of them. Now, venerable monks, the many dharmas come up, such as, we will put on the inner robe wrapped around. We will not put on the inner robe raised too high. We will not put on the inner robe too low. We will not put on the inner robe to be like a trunk of an elephant. And so it goes on to how you wear your robe, how you wrap your robe, how the robe should look. They give you advice on that. How you should approach people. The body should be well covered. You should go to houses that are not where there's little noise. They're not like parties and feasts and banquets and stuff. You should keep your eyes down. You should be looking at the ground. So the monk doesn't like stare people down when he goes to the houses. He's got his eyes down and he puts his bowl out and they put food in it or not. And they maintain a proper posture when they go to houses begging. There's no horseplay. There's a lot of things about your posture. You just basically, you maintain good posture. You're not shaking around and stuff like that and acting fidgety. And you need to be, represent monks. So you have to be still and serious and shy in a way. You don't take comfortable seats when they're offered to you in the house. You accept the alms food respectively. If you get something that doesn't look that good, you don't like frown or sneer or make some rude remark. So a lot of the suggestions on how you should eat, in a appropriate manner. And a lot of this continues to today. They have a ceremony they do at the Zen Center where I teach. That's called orioki. And it's where you have a meal during a retreat, and you have basically bowls. You have like 2 or 3 bowls, and they're all wrapped in a cloth, and you unwrap the bowls, and then each person is served in their bowls around the temple, and they get a little soup, they get a little rice and vegetables, and they get a third thing like a pickle. It's a Japanese tradition. And they eat this very simple meal, and then they use their little cloths to wipe out their bowls, and then they wrap it up. And they do this in the shrine room as a practice. So and it's all very dignified. Everything's done totally silently. There's no talking. Everybody's eyes are down. It's very kind of, it's formal. It takes, a few times to learn it. And it's really an interesting discipline. Trungpa Rinpoche introduced that in his later programs that he did. And part of it is it's very interesting for Americans because we're very casual eaters. I have this French exchange student over here, and we're having to apologize because we eat so much of our food with our hands. We don't in America. We don't use silverware quite often. You're eating sandwiches or ribs or fried chicken or whatever. Some of the common American foods, and so it's very interesting discipline for Americans. With the chopsticks and the little bowls, and eating very formally. And in a way that tries to capture this early, very beautiful, really, ritual, very simple, beautiful ritual, just going to a house, getting a bowl of food, taking it back, eating it, and doing that in the most graceful, dignified way possible. So when you recite all these rules, it would be a great training thing. Basically training all the monks so that you get a kind of uniformity, because everyone's getting the same rules twice a month, and they're seeing each other, of course, do these things. And so the Buddhist monks start looking the same. Buddhist monk comes to your town, and then 3 months later, another Buddhist monk comes to your town. They act the same way. They've been trained the same way. They teach the same thing. This is the creation of a viable order that can be of real benefit to people. So people can rely on these teachers, and they begin to create, they begin to be seen and establish a reputation for themselves. In fact, they establish such a good reputation that Buddhism spreads through all of Asia. And the reason it spreads through all of Asia is not because it's so philosophically subtle, because most people could care less about that, but because the image of these serene, disciplined, simple, renunciate monks is a very powerful spiritual image. And this really develops faith in people, in the Buddha, and in this approach to life. So they see these people that are serene and well-behaved in an extraordinary way through their training, and this inspires them to hear teachings and to take their own behavior up a notch. So it's a very helpful kind of process, and it's what led to Buddhism becoming as successful as it did. There are, moving along here, there are a whole set of rules about how you teach the Dharma. So one of the things that a monk does is that if people ask to be taught this Dharma, which is the truth, this is the truth about reality. That's what the Buddha is teaching. The people say, what is your truth? And then, well, here's my truth. There's suffering. There's a cause of suffering. There's a way to eliminate suffering. There's a path. The path is like this, and so forth and so on. So when you're teaching the Dharma, though, you have to wait for the right circumstance. You have to do this in a very dignified way. It's not, like we've all had people coming door to door, or when we were in college being approached on the street by various evangelicals. And here in Buddhism, you have to be invited, and they have to show respect. And if they don't invite you and show respect, you don't teach them. That's really important. No one teaches the Dharma unless they're asked to teach. In fact, this is an issue because if people don't ask to teach, then there's no Dharma transmitted, even though they might wish there was. We had that come up once when we had a great teacher from Tibet come, Mingyur Rinpoche, and he was going to come over to the house. And by now, teachers who come to the West generally will speak without being asked because they give a little talk. So we thought he would do that. But when he got there, he wouldn't say anything. And we asked him a few things, but we couldn't get a conversation going. And it was basically, he was waiting to be asked. He wasn't going to teach until we asked him very specific Dharma questions. And of course, not being prepped ahead of time, we weren't quite ready for that, so it was a little awkward. But that's very old-fashioned. So basically, what happens when you teach the Dharma is that you, as a teacher, take your seat, and everyone else is going to be in a lower position than you. So that's one of the ways they show respect. So the Buddha is slightly raised when he teaches, or any other Buddhist teacher, they're slightly raised, and here we mainly put people, and everybody else is seated a little lower. That's kind of an Indian thing. So the first rule here is that standing, we will not teach Dharma to one who is sitting, because you're going to be sitting, and they're going to be sitting lower than you. Sitting, we will not teach to Dharma to one who's lying down. Seated on a low seat, we will not teach Dharma to one seated on a high seat. The people have to be in front of you. They have to be you don't teach across the road. You don't teach to people who have their head covered. You don't teach to people who aren't sitting in a composed way, or the clothing's not arranged and stuff. You don't teach people who have hats on their heads, crowns on their heads, garlands on their heads, mounted on elephants, mounted on horses, mounted in carriages, wearing shoes, which would be, again, something, holding a stick, holding a parasol, holding a knife, holding a sword, holding any kind of weapon, wearing a coat of armor. So those are all the situations. And basically, again, it's a very simple thing, how you teach the Dharma, but there's a lot of ways you could do it wrong. So you learn what those are and you do it the right way. Essentially, you take a seat and people sit at your feet, and then that's a good situation, and then you can teach them. So that is the sort of a summary of what they recite. Those are all rules that they follow. You can see that the rules, although there's quite a number of them, and it sounds like they'd have to think about it a whole lot. Really, if you understand about self-assertiveness and don't do that, don't assert yourself, don't let other people, and adopt a dignified way, and also when you're teaching, make sure that everyone's doing that, then you're pretty well set. And if you just basically follow simple good behavior. So at the very end of the Praktimoksa, they have a concluding verses that they chant, which are very pretty, and I will read these to finish tonight. At the end of this group chant about the rules, they say together, enduring patience is the highest authority, is the highest austerity. Nirvana is the highest, say the Buddhas. For he who harms others is not a monk. He who violates others is not a shramana, a yogi practitioner. Just as one endowed with sight and exerting effort should avoid misconduct, so the wise man should avoid evils in the world of men. Not censuring others, not judging others, not harming others, acting with restraint, according to Praktimoksa, moderation in eating, living in a secluded dwelling, union with good factors. This is the teaching of the Buddhas. As a bee not agitating the scent or color of a flower, flies away taking only the nectar, so should the sage enter a village. So you just go to the village, you get your food, you go out to the forest. One should not contemplate the faults of others or what is done and not done by others, but one should contemplate the same difficulties concerning oneself. So everything is that you're looking at your own behavior, not the behavior of other people, or judging their behavior. For the wise one trained in the steps of sagehood, there is no delight in superior intellect. For the tranquil protector, always mindful, there are no sorrows. So in the early Buddhism, it's not being clever that's valued, or even knowing great amounts of Dharma that's valued, but rather your serenity, your calmness, your patience, your good virtue. That's the real sign of a well-trained practitioner. Merit increases for one who gives. Enmity does not accumulate for one who is well restrained. And the virtuous one renounces evil, and because of putting an end to kleshas, attains bliss. So this is just general advice on good behavior. And again, that theme over and over again: restraint, 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 patience. Bear the insults of others, bear the bad behavior of others, look only to your own behavior. Restrain from mixing it up with others, as much as one can. Not to do any evil, to attain good, to completely subdue one's own mind. This is the teaching of the Buddhas. Fairly famous quote there. Restraint of the body is good, restraint of speech is good, and restraint in all regards is good. The monk who is restrained in all aspects of his life is released from all suffering. So this is kind of like the Buddha's turn the other cheek, walk the extra mile, carry the robe, in that take it and be patient and restrain, and again, not restrain your own impulses and restrain any reaction towards other people that would be negative. Number 10, he who guards his speech is well restrained in his mind and does not perform evil with the body, being purified regarding the paths of action in these, shall attain the road proclaimed by the ancient sages. This Praktimoksa was recited in detail by the 7 celebrated Buddhas that were the chief protectors and guardians of the world, and they're named. The Buddhas and the Shravakas of the Buddhas are respectful towards this reading of the discipline. Being respectful of it, they attain the unconditioned path. Go forth, hold to, employ the teaching of the Buddha. Destroy the army of the Lord of Death, like an elephant who destroys a house of reeds. One who will diligently engage in this Dharma and this discipline, having abandoned birth and samsara, will definitely put an end to suffering. Thus, the Praktimoksa has been recited, the confession has been made by the Sangha for the increase of the teaching, for the sake of the mutual protection of discipline, for the sake of those for whom the sutra has been recited, for the sake of those for whom confession has been made. You should all guard your discipline as a yak protects its firstborn. Whatever merit has been gained from this full exposition of the Praktimoksa Sutra, may the entire world benefit from that and obtain the enlightenment of the sages. So that is the Praktimoksa. And thank you, you're very patient listening to all these rules.
Thank you, Bruce.
It sounds pretty challenging.
I think it's not. I haven't done it, but even for in Buddhist countries, Southeast Asian, they do it when they're young as teenagers for like 3 months. It's kind of a standard training, and really, you could see what it would teach you even in a 3-month period. And it's sort of like a retreat. I've been on retreats that are long, but self-denial is the idea here. All these rules involve some kind of self-denial. And if you could do that, if you really can let go of any form of self-assertion in that kind of way, then I think it's pretty easy, and it would be a very peaceful situation to just, live in this simple kind of way. I think you have a lot of reinforcement because everyone's trying to live in this way. Whereas different in, like in my small town, I mean, everybody a lot of people go to church. They're all trying to lead a Christian, virtuous life. But it's all over the place. It's not like people agree on the same standard of what that might mean. People are always cutting a lot of slack for themselves and not a whole lot of slack for other people. It's not anything like the Buddhist community and yet they're all supposed to be practicing some kind of Christian virtue. The Buddhist one has got some teeth in it. I mean, these guys are having to live by these rules. It's been brought in their face all the time. Everybody's doing it. It's a lot of reinforcement to lead this kind of strict, simple life. I think the hardest thing would be just that you wouldn't be so much the rule. These don't scare me too much. It's the fact. What are you going to do? I mean, all day. I mean, that would be the part we'd have to. I mean,
it's boring, huh?
I can wear one robe, have one bowl, leave people alone, go get my food, and then all right, now it's 8 o'clock in the morning and nothing to do. I've eaten with all the excitement I'm going to get during the day. I can't. All day long I just got to sit under a tree. I mean,
meditate.
And that part that would be tough. That total lack of any kind of energy. I mean, that's unimaginable for us. Maybe back then their lives were more boring and they could, they were happy to do that kind of thing. But man, you couldn't be without your, without your phone. I mean, they're not carrying cell phones with them out there. It's not entertainment. They're not reading. There's no books, no newspapers, nothing. You got to read.
The universe. Excuse me.
And the tree, trees grow. They live 300 years. They don't change much. You got every morning. That tree looks just like it did the day before. You don't notice that it's grown or anything. It doesn't change. Particularly you're in the tropics, you're not even getting seasons. So that would be the challenge, I think. And that's somewhat the challenge for us, really. I think that, for some people, getting to where they're, behaving well may be a challenge, but a lot of people learn that fairly early in life, by the time they go to school, not to cause trouble for other people when they're pretty good that way. But our problem is that we're so, our attention spans are shredded by modern civilization and media. And, to get that kind of space and that kind of mental simplicity, mental lack of stimulation, total lack of stimulation, that would be very challenging. And that's very challenging for us, and it's very challenging for everyone. I mean, the thing is that people are always getting overstimulated. So what we try to do so much is not so much emphasize good behavior, but emphasize, relax, go slow, take time, enjoy things, meditate, create space in your life, limit your activities. That's the kind of advice that I think modern people like yourselves benefit from it.
I was looking through those documents. I thought it was interesting that there was some little, one of the paragraphs said, with introduction, said the Buddha had named Buddhism. He had a name, so Vinaya Dharma, or just the Dharma of discipline, was the name of the whole thing, which totally didn't get transferred over to us. But
Well, part of the problem in modern times is that the monks have gotten laxer than they once were, and they don't make a whole lot of. Nobody takes the laity very seriously, the monks, because they may not be as disciplined as they once were, but they're still full-time professionals, and we're not. So they don't really ever try and, other than getting people to not kill things, they don't really try and ever get anybody to do much. So there's not a whole lot of emphasis on behavior, and I think that's been problematic. I think a lot of the problems, all the problems that I've seen in Buddhist groups in the last 40 or 50 years are due to people not having good discipline. I don't think there's any problem with people understanding the Dharma. I think people are pretty good. There's been a lot of good meditation done and practice and study, but the moral discipline of practitioners has been really bad, and of Buddhist leaders has been really bad, and that's very much hindering. That's caused a lot of problems, and if it's going to have I tell this particularly to the young people that are training at the Zen Center. I mean, they've got to really get this down that, good conduct is absolute, because you can't have teachers, seducing their students. You can't have people making money off the Dharma. There's just so many things that you can't have people like getting, rich off of other people doing work for them because they're, leaders and stuff like that. I mean, there's just been this whole kind of moral laxity that pervades modern Asian Buddhism and also Westerners.
Yeah.
That's got to be, if it's going to be helpful in the future, it's got to have more of a backbone of continual good behavior, and people taking that seriously. So I think it's real important.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
well, we've gone past the hour and we lost a couple of people, so I think we'll conclude for the evening if we don't have any further questions.
Thanks,
I have a
Bruce.
question.
Yes.
So how many of these rules do you think came into being while the Shakyamuni Buddha was living?
There's no way
Hard to speculate. Yeah.
I think that the sense is, from what I've read, is that there were fewer rules, and that a lot of the rules became necessary once they started to expand. If you're just a bunch of people hanging around the Buddha, then they're going to actually stay pretty well in line. For one thing, they'd be, actually, if you're around a very enlightened teacher, you'd be surprised what good effect that has on your behavior, because you don't want to have him staring at you for being a fool. That would be, you'd die on the spot, right? So all the Buddha would have to do is like stare over at a monk, and that would take care of that. But as it got bigger and they started spreading out, and different underlings were doing things, and lots of teachers and lots of groups and then you've got to have some commonality in how you approach this. And that's probably when you start getting more rules and everybody getting together and just deciding, okay, this is how we're going to do it. And, interestingly, in the extra material we sent out, the guy said, well, why rules? Why not just general ethical principles? And he said, well, a rule is very specific. It's not something that you can quibble with. I mean, you either have one robe or you have two robes. You have two robes, that's a problem. And there's no, you can't get out of that. You either got one or you got two, right? So they make very specific situations. You can't be with, and so that they're trying to just make it very sharp and precise, so you get the point.
Yeah.
But if you really, of course, get the principle, which is self-denial, then the rules are really easy to follow.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, essentially, if there's no ego, you can't really, it's very hard to get in trouble. How can you get in trouble? You won't harm other people. You won't, your actions will always be good by nature. So there's a way to make it very simple. And you could have 1,000 of them. And we would never violate any of them.
It's like a little bit like in Christianity, where Jesus came along and said, they asked him about the 10 Commandments, and he said, really, those first two, that'll do it for you. If you,
Right.
if you, yeah, you can boil it down.
Yeah. Really, it's true. If you love God and you love your neighbor, then everything else takes care of itself.
I'd like to share one other insight before we go, but I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No.
So I was raised by a man who was born in 1906 and grew up on a farm and so on, and he became an just amazing environmental appreciator, which I imagine the Buddha was, and that's how a Buddhist monk could feel today sitting under a tree. That, you were talking last time, I think, about the secret life of trees, And if you're there in nature, you're appreciating a ton of fine detail, which is, sort of the legacy I got from my dad, is being able to observe and appreciate nature on that level that where, sitting in nature all day would be a feast.
You're right.
Yeah, full of stimulation.
Yeah.
But in our modern life, we are very disconnected.
Yeah, very few find the forest that interesting. And, 'cause I have a forest now. I bought one, and I go down there, and I thought it's fascinating to me. And everyone's just, what do you want with a bunch of trees? And they go, well, that's quite. What can you say? You either get it or you don't. I mean,
Right.
and a lot of people, that would be the most boring thing of all. Seeing one tree, you see them all.
Yeah, it's true.
So yesterday, I took Eli to Loose Park, and we sat under a tree for a while, and he was pretty interesting during that time, like looking at the dirt and the roots of the grass, and he was into it for a little while, for longer than I had expected before he wanted to run off and go to the playground, but it definitely changed his mood and his sense of things, and it was very nice just sitting there for a while.
When we had the grandchildren here, I had planned various kinds of cool outings for them, but all they wanted to do was play with these 2 ponds I have in the backyard that have frogs in them right now, and they don't want to go on any kind of car outing or scenic tourist destination. They just want to play with frogs. And they did this, for like 6 hours, 4 or 5 hours at a time. 6 hours. I mean, that's amazing. I mean, I could look at a pond for a few minutes, but I mean, 6 hours, it's pretty. They just did something. They just could occupy those so, and you can't. It's really hard. You can't, as an adult, to go back to that kind of child's sense of wonder about nature, and that that. Of course, we have an advantage in some way. If you're used to watching television or playing video games, nature is actually quite a bit more exciting.
Yes.
You don't know exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah. One meditation that I learned was based on, first calming the body and the mind, and then tuning into sounds and count how many different sounds you can hear and what's at the bottom, what sound is underneath everything. We were to ask ourselves that, can we hear that? And so that's one of the things I do when I sit in nature. I just, I catalog, without naming, I catalog what I observe and let it go. And the layers and layers and layers and layers and layers of things that are there to observe and appreciate is truly astounding. But, I had to wait till I retired to get back to doing that because life does not, maybe a weekend with your child under a tree gives you that opportunity, but life just doesn't afford us that.
Yeah.
Usually.
Yeah. No, that's excellent. Particularly the one that's listening to the layers of sound. That's an excellent meditation.
I liked it.
There was one spiritual, we'll read it down the road, but it's the Buddha says, well, all you great bodhisattvas, how did you attain enlightenment? And they each have different meditation technique they did, right? And they say, well, I did this, and that's how I got enlightened. But that's pretty good. And they go down, each one has a different one, and they're pretty amazing stuff. And then they get to Avalokiteshvara, and he says, well, I did this one where I listened to sound, and I kept going back and back and back until I got to the source of sound. And the Buddha says, yes, that's the best. Hey, I've got to run. Joe, I'll talk to you tomorrow.
Okay, that's great.
My wife somewhere, and I've got to go. I got to go pick her up. So,
Thank you, Bruce.
good
Thanks.
night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you all, and we'll see you next week.
Okay.
We'll have a new topic. No more discipline.
I really enjoyed this. Thank you.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. By this merit, we all attain omniscience and defeat the wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of earth, all the weakness and death, from the ocean, sorrow.
May I free all beings.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Arala.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.